They say when justice falls silent, the wicked will laugh. But in Bluebrook, that silence became thunder. I once watched my own son hire a woman to impersonate his mother, mimicking her voice, her gestures, even her memories, all to steal the forest my wife and I had spent our lives preserving. They thought I was senile, thought I could no longer tell truth from deceit. But they forgot one thing. A man who once built bridges through storms also knows how to rebuild justice when faith collapses. The story you're about to hear isn't just about betrayal. It's about how a father turned pain into the light that guided an entire town. If you believe truth can be hidden but never erased, stay until the end. And if you're listening to this, I want to thank you for giving your time to stories that make people believe in what's right rather than what's easy. Leave a single if you believe justice can rise from silence. And don't forget to hit subscribe so we can keep walking this road together, where every story is a bridge between pain, trust, and truth. That afternoon, rain fell like thin wires drawn from a gray sky, striking the tin roof of my workshop in a steady rhythm. The scent of wet pine mixed with machine oil. The planer had just stopped, leaving a faint vibration beneath my palm. My phone, face down on the bench, buzzed twice, then went still. I brushed wood dust off my shirt and picked it up. "Grandpa." My grandson Noah's voice was urgent, frayed by the wind slipping through his phone's mic. "I just saw Grandma walk into Cedar Hill Motel with 5 men in suits. It's raining. I'm under the awning. I saw her clearly." I turned on the speaker, staring out the window at the rain-soaked pines. "Noah, you're joking, right?" "No. She's wearing that ugly blue brooch you used to tease her about." My chest tightened like a rope being pulled. That brooch, Martha called it Mother's Gem, had broken years ago. She said she'd thrown it away. I thought I'd misheard. "Cedar Hill?" "Yes. The old one with the flickering neon sea. It's right past the second turn after the wooden bridge. You should come." The wind shifted, slapping a sheet of rain against the glass. I didn't say, "Thank you," didn't tell him, "Don't worry." I just murmured, "All right," shut the workshop door, as habitually as a man who spent his life ensuring every latch fits, and got into my truck. The road down to town in the rain looked like a black ribbon, glistening with water. I drove slower than usual, not from fear of skidding, but because my mind was shuffling through old certainties. Martha hated motels. Martha would never choose a place with flickering lights and carpets that smelled of smoke. Martha despised rain on her neck. Every fact of a shared life suddenly felt like a step giving way beneath my feet. I turned onto the slope leading to Cedar Hill Motel. The sign trembled in the wind. Sea blinked in and out, leaving Eder Hill Motel. The letter E pulsing red like a faint ember. The yellowed light spilled onto the wet pavement, making each raindrop glow. Beneath the awning, Noah stood huddled in a thin jacket, shoes splattered with mud. He looked both relieved and scared when he saw me. "You came." I set a hand on his shoulder, feeling the cold through the fabric. "You're sure?" "I saw her get out of that black car over there. She got out first. 5 men in suits followed. They didn't talk loudly. They went to the desk. The clerk handed them a key. I was behind the soda machine. I saw her sign. Martha H. The H slants a little. I followed his pointing finger toward the cloudy glass of the reception office. The smell hit first. Stale smoke, damp carpet, cheap chlorine from a long-abandoned summer pool. The scent of motels that had weathered too many seasons. I told Noah to head home. He shook his head. "Go on in, I'll stay here. If something happens, I'll call Claire." I nodded. He was a child of 2 worlds, one that still knew how to dial a landline, and one that had a lawyer's number memorized. The door opened with a faint, tired ding, like an old bell losing its tone. The man behind the counter looked up from a static TV, studying me as if I were a raindrop staining his worn carpet. "Need a room?" "No." I said, pulling out a 50 from my wallet and setting it on the water-stained laminate. I'm looking for someone. His eyes flicked between the bill and my face, then, by reflex honed over years, his hand slid toward the money. I replaced the 50 with a crisp 100. His grin stretched, nasal and lazy. Talk to me. A woman. Gray hair, about 69, maybe 70. Blue-gray raincoat. 5 men in suits. Black car. He leaned back. Yeah, not the usual crowd. Not from around here. Yeah, she was here. What did they do? Came in, talked. Low voices, but she was leading it. He clasped his fingers together. Paid cash. Wrote it down. Room 7. The rain outside suddenly seemed louder. Name? Martha H. He emphasized the H as if to reassure me his memory hadn't failed. I looked down at the damp registry book, its pages puckered from moisture, the black ink long-dried. The handwriting was short, hurried. The way the T crossed long, something I'd watched for 40 years, looked eerily mimicked, as if by someone trained to copy her hand. I asked a few idle questions just to buy my heart a minute to slow down. When they arrived, when they left, whether they carried any luggage. He said, came around 1 in the afternoon, left about 3:30. Black car first. That woman left later, and another car picked her up. Cash, no ID. Then he turned back to the TV, as if every transaction was a stone tossed into water, rippling, circling, then still again. I thanked him with a nod, stepped back, my hand unconsciously brushing the small wooden ruler I always kept in my coat pocket, a habit from years of touching thousands of millimeters of concrete and steel. Noah looked at me. What now? Home, I said slowly. We're going home. The road back felt steeper than before, or maybe it was the potholes after the rain. Noah sat in the passenger seat, so silent that I could hear our 2 breaths overlap. He stared out the window and whispered, as if afraid to hear himself, Grandpa, do you think... I don't think, I cut in softly. When a bridge trembles underfoot, the walker must look straight ahead. I just steered past the crossroads, past the sign that read, Blue Brook Welcome, past the wooden fences I'd painted white with my own hands. The rain thinned, as if the sky itself wanted to listen to what sound would rise first in that wooden house on the slope. The house appeared behind the pines, warm and golden as always. The porch light was already on against the gray sky. The wicker chair sat in its usual corner, and the plaid blanket folded neatly over the armrest. Through the window of the living room, I saw a silver-haired woman, with her hair pinned up, reading a book. She lifted her eyes from the page and smiled, the exact smile my memory had stored 1,000 times. A slight lift of the left corner, a faint squint of the eyes. I heard Noah swallow, hard. Grandma... He didn't finish the sentence. I just set my hand on the doorknob. Go in, I said, more to myself than to him. The door opened, and the scent of cinnamon mixed with dry pine boards hit me like an old family photograph. The woman looked up and closed the book. You're home, she said softly, her voice sliding across the wood of the table, the doorway, and settling lightly on the fabric lampshade. I stood there a beat longer than usual, listening to each syllable like measuring the vibration of a long-standing bridge. It's raining outside, I said absently. Shall I make you tea? She asked, the familiar question wrapped in a strange brightness. I looked at her hands. The wrists were small, the pinky curved slightly, right. But the nails no longer had the color Martha painted at the start of every month. A faint white line ran down her middle finger. I didn't remember ever seeing it. I heard myself say, I'll change my coat. Noah stood back, eyes fixed on the woman's face. He understood the way an engineer studies a joint, not by its surface, but by the direction the grains run inside. I passed by, pausing at the kitchen door. On the shelf, a tin of Earl Grey sat beside a jar of chamomile. The Earl Grey tin was open. Martha hated Earl Grey. She said it smelled like expensive soap. I touched the lid lightly, feeling the leftover chill of something recently set down. I walked back to the living room slowly. The woman had reopened her book, eyes gliding across the lines, as if no unfamiliar wind had ever passed through this house. Noah stood in the hall, clutching his backpack strap, his face holding a question I wasn't ready to answer. "You," she said, looking up, her tone carrying a soft chide. "Why are you looking at me like a stranger?" I smiled, the kind of smile a man gives when testing the sway of a bridge in the wind. Not from doubt, but from duty. "No, I'm just trying to remember when we last changed the porch light." The words slipped through the air easily, like a flick of the finger, landing on the rug and lying still. She chuckled, shook her head, looked back at her page, her thumb smoothing a corner. I took out a handkerchief, wiped the rain from my hood, and set it on the armrest across from her, and that's when I saw it, a pale green glint beneath the yellow light. On the armrest of the wicker chair where she sat lay a brooch, round and cheap-looking like a piece of old candy. Gold-plated frame, scratched surface. I knew every mark on it. I used to joke that it was the pacifier gem. Martha had thrown it away one autumn morning when the clasp broke. She'd laughed and said, "Enough. This thing's followed me long enough." I had watched it disappear, heard the clink of metal hitting the bottom of the trash bin like the sound of a habit closing. The brooch now lay there, calm and green as if someone had just placed it, deliberately enough that it could not be an accident. But I knew the weight of an object that returned from where it shouldn't have been. I stared until time seemed to fold. She followed my gaze and smiled. "Oh, the old brooch," she said lightly, like a dry leaf's rustle. "So it's still here." I heard my own voice inside my head, slow and sticky as pine resin. "No, it's still not here. It was gone. And if it's lying here now, then something else isn't where it's supposed to be anymore." The next morning, mist lay thin over the Bluebrook woods. Tiny beads of moisture clung to the window pane, reflecting the weak sunlight like a thin silk. I sat at the breakfast table, looking at the woman across from me, the woman the whole town still called Martha Harrington, while I tried to measure, among familiar details, what was off by a millimeter. The coffee cooled in the cup. I began the first test. "Tea or coffee this morning?" I asked in the most ordinary voice I could manage. "Tea," she answered, not looking up from the paper. "Earl Grey, if there is any." I froze. Martha hated Earl Grey. She used to say the bergamot made her head ache, that it was soapy water for London ladies. In 40 years together, I had never seen her drink more than a sip. Yet now this woman said it lightly, as if it were an old habit. I poured boiling water, put in the tea, letting the essential oils bloom. When I brought it out, she accepted it, blew on it, and took a long sip. Her face did not wince. "Delicious," she said, setting the cup down. "It's been so long since I had a proper Earl Grey." Something inside me broke. Even the smallest detail lives in memory. My wife loved chamomile and never touched Earl Grey. I smiled to hide the changing beat of my heart. Yes, it sure is. The second test came naturally. I went to the wooden cabinet and took out an old perfume bottle. "You remember this scent?" I asked. She tilted her head. "What is that?" "White linen," I said. "The one you used in the 80s. She sniffed and then gave an embarrassed laugh. "Oh, not familiar. I'm not sure I ever used that." The answer landed like a cold pebble. "Not familiar." Those two words were the gap between a memory and a practiced imitation. I put the perfume back, and my hand trembled slightly, though nobody noticed. The final test, simple but the cruelest, was in the small bedroom drawer. I opened it and took out Martha's heart medicine. Beta blockers. The bottle was still full, the label stamped last month. Martha never forgot her pills. She carried them in her pocket, even when watering the garden. "If I forget," she used to say, "you remind me because my heart is weaker than you think." Yet here the bottle sat untouched, cap not turned. 3 tests, 3 answers. All 3 said the woman in this house was not Martha Harrington. the woman who had built bridges with me through storms and shared loss at my side. I stood in the hallway, looking through the window where the morning light made tiny floating dust motes visible. In that moment, I understood the real pain wasn't losing someone, but seeing a familiar face sit in their place, speak with their voice, while the soul inside was hollow. Noah appeared in the doorway, eyes asking but not daring to speak. I only nodded. "Grandpa, should I tell Claire?" "Not yet," I said, voice hoarse. "First, we must be sure. To catch someone who alters the blueprint, you must let them think their drawing is right." That night, I looked in the mirror. The face that looked back was of a man who had once known how to measure every tremor of a bridge in a storm, yet had never prepared for his own house to become a scene. I washed my hands, dried them, and took out my notebook. On the first page I wrote, "Evidence log, Blue Brook." I put down the first entries. 7:12 in the morning, Earl Grey tea. No adverse reaction. 9:05 in the morning, did not recognize white linen. 10:30 in the morning, beta blocker bottle still with intact seal. I set the pen down and looked at the faint, shaky lines like a faltering pulse, then closed the notebook and exhaled. From that moment, I decided, if the perpetrator wanted me to seem senile, I would let them believe it. I would forget names, forget dates, even forget myself, for now, just to see when they think I'm not lucid, what they will do next. Justice does not need to shout. It only needs someone sober enough to pretend madness at the right moment. I began my performance on Tuesday morning, the day the rain had just stopped, leaving the scent of damp pine and cold earth seeping through every crack in the house. Light streamed through the curtains in pale golden stripes, crawling slowly across the wooden wall where I had hung the blueprint of the fail-safe bridge from 1974, a structure that had never collapsed despite decades of storms. And yet here I was, pretending to fall apart, piece by piece. At breakfast, I sat across from the woman everyone still believed to be Martha. I poured milk, intentionally spilling a few drops. When she asked, "You forgot the sugar again?" I looked up blankly and smiled. "Oh, I thought I was at the city office. Someone used to make it for me." She chuckled with a faint look of pity and turned to David. "He's getting worse." David nodded, unable to hide the quiet satisfaction of a man watching his plan move forward. I lifted a forkful of eggs and asked, "What day is it today again?" "Tuesday, Dad," David said absently, eyes still fixed on his phone. "You should rest more. Mom and I will handle the rest." I nodded, feigning confusion. In my head, every detail was recorded. Tone, expression, choice of words. The weaker I acted, the bolder they became. The terrifying thing about pretending to lose your mind is realizing how quickly others assume they have the right to make every decision for you. By noon, when Martha went out with David, I called Noah into the workshop. The boy carried a small pouch, his eyes taut as wire. "This is an AirTag, Grandpa," he whispered. "I set it on my iPhone. If we slip it into her purse, we'll know where she goes and where she stops. The signal's weak around here, but it'll work." I looked at him and saw in his eyes a cold intelligence rare for his age. "Don't get caught," I warned. "And remember, she's not your grandmother." He nodded, hiding the coin-sized tracker in his pocket. That afternoon, when the woman bent to pick up a rag, Noah stepped forward to help, sliding the AirTag into her bag in less than 2 seconds. I watched from afar, saying nothing. Then I returned to my desk and opened my black notebook. Evidence log, Blue Brook. I wrote in neat blue ink. 12:47 p.m. AirTag planted in suspect Martha's purse. 1:05 p.m. Subject left house with David, heading toward town center. 1:42 p.m. Location signal, Cedar Hill Motel. I sat still, the pen hovering. That name cut back like an old blade. Cedar Hill Motel. Same place, same path. Deep down, I already knew the ending of this impersonation, but I needed to see it. Every piece of evidence, every detail to close the file. That evening, I deliberately called my son by the wrong name. When David entered the living room, I looked up and said, "Michael, you're home." He frowned. "Dad, I'm David." I smiled. Vaguely. "Ah, right. Michael is... who again?" "You need rest," he said, eyes gleaming with relief. "Victory. You're really losing it." The words pricked like pins, but I kept my dazed expression. "Maybe," I murmured. "Maybe my memory isn't what it used to be." When night fell, the only sound left in the house was the soft patter of rain on the roof. I lay on the armchair, pretending to sleep. David's door creaked open. His footsteps crossed the hall, stopping at the kitchen. Then his voice, low but clear enough to slice through the hush between gusts of wind. "Yes, Monday we announce the Bluebrook Village project, before he figures it out." I opened my eyes, staring at the ceiling. A single drop fell from the roof, breaking with a faint teach, like the period at the end of a blueprint. In the dark, I knew I'd just heard the thing I needed most, the proof that this bridge had to be built now. I sat in silence a while longer, listening to the drip from the eaves hitting the stone path. David's words echoed again in my mind, sharp as a hammer striking steel. "Monday we announce the Bluebrook Village project, before he figures it out." I knew the game had outgrown the family. This was a scheme written in ink, with signatures, contracts, and legality. And to win such a game, I needed someone who understood the law better than those twisting it. I picked up my phone, opened contacts, and stopped at the name Claire Monroe, the attorney who had helped me establish the Harrington Foundation. She was a woman of few words, each one cutting through tangled text like a blade. I pressed call. On the other end, Claire's voice came through, calm and sharp as morning frost. "Mr. Harrington, it's been a while. What's happened?" I looked up at the ceiling light, trembling faintly, and said slowly, "Claire, I think someone's wearing my wife's face, and they plan to sell the Bluebrook forest before sunrise on Monday." A short silence, then Claire replied, "I'll be there tomorrow. Keep everything as it is, and if you can, don't let them know you're still lucid." Thursday morning, mist still hung over the Bluebrook hills, like a thin veil of smoke. I waited by the front gate, listening to the sound of Claire Monroe's car pulling in, the door shutting softly, precise and efficient, just like her. She stepped out, gray coat, a file folder clutched firmly in hand. "I reviewed the copy of your trust ownership record," she said evenly, "and I think we need to go there immediately." I didn't have to ask where. Cedar Hill Motel was already etched in my mind like an oil stain. On the way, Claire's car rolled through the damp pine woods, tires cutting through the valley road. I looked out the window, the pale light reflecting an old face with lines like dried riverbeds. "If my assumption is right," Claire said, "they're using a falsified power of attorney, replacing the legal trustee within the trust. When the signature belongs to an imposter, the entire asset, over $4.2 million in the Bluebrook Land Trust, can be sold legally on paper." I nodded slightly. A bridge only collapses when people believe it's safe. When the car turned into the motel lot, the signs still flickered in the sun. The letters of Cedar Hill had peeled further, exposing rusted metal underneath. Inside the lobby, the same clerk looked up, his eyes mixing surprise with fatigue. "You came here before," he said. "I still have the log." Claire stepped forward, laying down her attorney badge and a verification letter from the Harrington Foundation. Her voice was calm but carried authority. "We're investigating a case of document forgery involving my client. We need your cooperation, and if there's surveillance footage, we need access." The clerk glanced at me, then at the papers, hesitated, and finally sighed. He opened a drawer and took out the guest ledger and an old USB stick. "I guess you mean the silver-haired lady. She talked a lot, acted like a boss. The 5 men with her followed her lead." He flipped through the logbook, pointing to a signature. "Martha H." The ink line trembled slightly, but the upward stroke of the H, that was something Martha never did. I felt a slow, squeezing pressure in my chest. Claire plugged the USB into her laptop. The screen lit up, showing grainy surveillance footage from the bar across the street. 6 people sat around a table. 5 men in suits, and 1 woman with tidy silver hair in a gray raincoat, her face half hidden by dim light. She pulled an envelope from her bag, placed it on the table, and slid it toward the oldest man. He opened it, nodded, and they all began signing papers. Their words couldn't be heard, only the faint curve of her smile. Strange, cold, deliberate. Claire rewound the video, paused at the moment the woman stood and adjusted her hair, her face fully visible. My heart skipped, no doubt. That was not my Martha. But she wore the same gray coat I'd given my wife for her 60th birthday. The same green brooch. The same posture. A perfect copy built to steal trust. Claire looked up, voice measured. It's possible they filed falsified records, even declaring her deceased, to reassign trust representation. So it's clear, I said. This is a forged signature operation. They're using the identity of Martha Harrington, labeled as mildly incapacitated, to sell the trust's assets. I asked, who benefits most from transferring trustee rights? She answered, the one who gains control after it's signed, David. I turned toward the window. In the mirror on the opposite wall, our reflection appeared, a young attorney and an old man realizing his home was just a facade. Can we stop it? I asked. Claire shook her head. Only with proof, or at least evidence she's not the real Martha. I'll petition for an identity verification order. The clerk looked around, then said quietly, she told me something. I still remember. We both turned. What did she say? He spoke slowly. She said everything would be signed before 9 a.m. Monday. I froze. 9 a.m. Exactly the time David had whispered in the dark. The scattered pieces finally aligned into a single image. The Blue Brook Village announcement wasn't just a business deal. It was the final strike. The sale of everything I had built. Everything Martha had stood for. Claire closed the laptop, her eyes cold as steel. Then we have 3 days, Mr. Harrington. I looked out at the wet road, the Cedar Hill sign flickering like a heartbeat gone off rhythm. 3 days to prove the woman wearing my wife's face was an imposter. 3 days to reclaim what I'd lost without letting anger ruin the plan. Because true justice doesn't need to scream. It only needs to arrive on time. Friday night, the wooden house on the Blue Brook hillside glowed with that kind of golden light people use to hide something. I heard the faint clinking of silverware and half-hearted laughter coming from the dining room. Dad, come on in, David called, his voice deliberately cheerful. Through the doorway, I saw the table neatly set. Red wine, candles, cream linens, grilled salmon prepared by the woman everyone still believed was Martha. Everything looked perfect, if I hadn't known this was only the opening act of another performance. I sat at the head of the table, the seat Martha herself used to leave empty for me. What's the occasion? I asked. David poured wine and smiled. Just a family dinner, Dad. Mom and I wanted to talk about something to help you rest easy. I nodded slightly, eyes fixed on every small movement of the woman beside me. She poured water, adjusted my napkin, every gesture smooth enough to look natural, yet her eyes flickered away each time mine met hers. David began with a voice so gentle it made me wary. You know, Dad, your health hasn't been great lately, and your memory's not what it used to be. I think it's time Mom and I handle the finances and manage the Blue Brook Fund for you. He paused, watching for my reaction. I gave a faint smile. Finances? That fund's doing fine. Claire just sent me last month's report. David replied quickly, I know, but lawyers are always too cautious. You don't need to worry anymore. You should relax, read, garden. We'll take care of the rest. I studied his face, the same boy who once sat in the passenger seat of my truck at 8 years old, when I taught him how to measure the distance between bridge beams with a laser ruler. I remembered his grin when he said, I want to build bridges like you, Dad. And now that same child spoke of handling finances as though my life's work were a burden. the fake Martha chimed in, her tone unnaturally sweet. David just wants what's best for you. You've done enough. I lifted my glass, watching the red liquid glimmer under candlelight. I know, I said softly. It's just that the bridges I built haven't collapsed yet, so I don't see a reason to retire. The air tightened. David broke the silence with a smirk. Dad, you forget a lot these days. Be honest. Do you even remember what I studied? I looked straight into his eyes. The light reflected in them was cold as steel. Your major? I paused deliberately, letting the silence stretch. Construction engineering, wasn't it? He laughed loudly, mocking. Wrong, Dad. I studied economics. You really don't remember anymore, do you? The room felt smaller. The fake Martha gave a forced laugh, resting a hand on his shoulder to calm him, but the smugness in their eyes was unmistakable. It wasn't just disrespect. It was confidence that I was powerless. I didn't answer right away. I turned toward the window where the pines swayed in the wind. Then I said quietly, Some bridges, David, collapse from just 1 millimeter off. People think they're clever when they alter the design, but they don't realize the original was balanced by a lifetime of experience. I paused, meeting his gaze. And when a bridge collapses, it takes more than steel down with it. It takes honor. David went silent, his smile fading. The fake Martha set down her wineglass, her eyes flickering with unease. I stood, folded my napkin, and placed it neatly on the table. Thank you for dinner, I said, but I'm full. Stepping out onto the porch, I inhaled the scent of pine and the faint chirp of crickets from the valley below. Behind me, I heard David's irritated voice. He's old. He doesn't know anything anymore. I just smiled faintly, the smile of an engineer who knows the steel cable is nearing its limit. All it takes is one small gust of wind, and everything will snap on its own. I came to Claire Monroe's office the next morning, when mist still clung to the large windows overlooking Bluebrook Street. Her room was as tidy as the last time I visited. Dark wooden desk, neatly aligned bookshelves, and a small fern on the windowsill, light glinting on its fresh green fronds. Claire was standing by the whiteboard, buttoned shirt at the collar, a marker in hand. I've reviewed your trust file, she said as I entered, but now you need to tell me everything, every detail, even the smallest. I sat down and slowly recounted it from the start. From the night Noah saw Martha enter the Cedar Hill Motel with 5 men, to the dinner full of innuendo, and the recording I heard of David on the phone talking about announcing Bluebrook Village. When I finished, Claire was silent for a moment, her hands folded together. Sounds like a carefully staged play. They have a plan, documents, and even actors. If what you say is true, we're facing forgery and fraudulent authorization. I looked out the window where rows of trees were beginning to shed their first yellow leaves of the season. I don't care what crimes they commit, I said quietly. I just want to keep that forest. I spent half my life protecting Bluebrook from development plans that turn woodland into concrete. Claire looked at me, eyes sharp, but with a hint of respect. So we need to start with evidence. She went to the file rack and took out a slim packet, clipped in a clear plastic cover. This is the trust agreement you and Martha set up in the year 2016. I found a clause few notice, the fail-safe provision, a self-locking clause. She pointed to the small print in the appendix. If a trustee or agent executes any transaction showing signs of fraud or identity forgery, all asset access is automatically frozen. No withdrawals, no transfers. But this only takes effect if there is authenticated evidence of such conduct. I nodded. So, if I can prove the person living in my house is not my wife, all their transactions stop? Exactly, Claire answered, and the strongest evidence is DNA. The plan began to take shape. Claire spoke quickly, each step clear. You must collect a DNA sample from that woman, a hair, a cup, anything with biological traces. I will send that sample to the lab in Portland and compare it with Martha's old DNA sample. I remember you sent one to the hospital. during last year's cardiac checkup. I nodded, my eyes lighting up for the first time in days. Noah, the boy, came in with a seriousness rare for his age. "I can help," he said, setting his phone on the table. "I've turned on family location for the whole family from my device. I'll know where David goes, how long he stays, and who he meets." Claire smiled. "Smart. But be careful. Don't let them detect it. Everything now needs to be quiet." We looked at the small map on the phone screen together, a red dot moving slowly along the lakeside road. "He's heading to Harland and Cuckoo's developer's office," Noah said. I clenched my fist. That name I had heard in meetings about land planning. They were the group that had tried to expand a resort right up to the Blue Brook Preserve. Claire quickly jotted notes. 1. Collect DNA sample of the fake Martha. 2. Verify the real Martha's whereabouts, possible detention or concealment. 3. Track David, destinations, contacts, transactions. 4. Activate the failsafe clause once we have evidence. She looked up. "If everything matches, I'll file an emergency petition with the county to freeze the assets before they can sign. But we only have this weekend." I gazed outside where sunlight filtered through Blue Brook's canopy, casting scattered beams across the table. The pine scent still clung to my coat from home. I could feel my heart beating slowly but steadily. "Claire," I said, "I built bridges across the fiercest rivers and never let one fall. I won't let Blue Brook be turned to concrete, even if I must use my last breath." Claire nodded once. "Then let's begin." That afternoon, the sky over Blue Brook darkened like a heavy blanket settling over the forest. I sat in the dining room, watching the fake Martha busy herself in the kitchen. She wore a checkered apron, thin gloves, and moved with quick, practiced precision, as if she already knew every corner of this house. "Would you like some tea?" she asked, her voice soft, laced with the kind of false affection a man who'd lived 40 years with the real thing could smell from across the room. "Earl Grey, right?" she added, eager to sound familiar. I nodded faintly, keeping my voice weak. "Yes, just like always." When the water boiled, the scent of bergamot filled the kitchen. I waited until she set the teapot on the table, then pretended my hand trembled, brushing my arm just enough to spill it. "Oh, I'm sorry," I said, jumping up and grabbing napkins from the counter to hand her. She took them, dabbing her wrist and the table. I noticed the lipstick stain left on the cup, the sweat print of her fingers on the paper. "It's all right," she smiled. "Let me clean it up." But as she turned away, I folded the napkin neatly and slipped it into my coat pocket. An old engineer might forget a meal, but he never forgets to collect a sample of evidence. That evening the rain came again in a thin drizzle. The desk lamp cast a pale glow across the open notebook, labeled Evidence Log, Blue Brook. My handwriting moved slowly. 1912. DNA sample, napkin, lipstick, sweat, collected from suspect, temporarily sealed in plastic. Noah came in holding a small wooden box. "Grandpa," he said softly, "I found this in Grandma's old dresser." I looked down, a rosewood jewelry box with a rusty clasp. Inside lay a few trinkets, a bracelet, a pendant, and a lock of silver hair sealed in a clear plastic pouch. "I remember when Grandma was in the hospital," Noah said. "The nurse collected her hair sample for her heart tests." I held the bag, my hand trembling, not from age, but from the sensation of touching a memory. "Good work, Noah. This is the key." That night we drove to Claire's office. She was still there, desk lamp glowing over her focused face, her sharp eyes softening when she saw us. I placed the 2 plastic bags on her desk. "Sample A, napkin. Sample B, Martha's real hair," I said. Claire immediately opened a drawer and pulled out official forensic seal bags. She worked quickly, labeling, timing, and signing. "I'll send them to the Portland lab tonight," she said, dialing her phone. "They owe me a favor. If all goes well, we'll have a preliminary result by morning." While she arranged the shipment, Noah checked the AirTag signal. "Grandpa," he said, "the tracker in her purse is moving." Claire and I turned at once. On his screen, a red dot was leaving the house, crossing the main road heading south. Location? Claire asked. Harland and Cummered Developers, Noah replied firmly. She frowned. That's the same firm we suspected David was working with. I stood and looked out the rain-streaked window. The sound of wind against the glass was like steel under tension. If she's going there, Claire said quietly, they're preparing to sign. I tightened my hand, a chill running down my spine. Then at least, I said, they'll be signing under a name the court will soon know is false. We stayed a little longer, reviewing each of Claire's prepared documents. At the bottom corner of one page, she underlined a note in slanted handwriting. Biological evidence confirmed. Trigger asset freeze clause. As I reached the door, I turned to her. Do you think justice will come in time? I asked. She looked up, smiling faintly, tired but resolute. If justice walks slowly, we just need to keep the light on so it can see the way. That night, I returned home. The kitchen still smelled of Earl Grey. The Martha chair still had a faint tea stain left on the wood. I opened the evidence log and wrote the final line. 2346. DNA samples dispatched. Subject en route to Harland and Cummered Developers. I sat still, listening to the rain ease. On the table, my phone buzzed softly. A message from Claire. Samples arrived at the lab. Processing now. I'll update as soon as I have results. I looked at the desk lamp, its red indicator light reflecting off the wall, blinking steadily in rhythm like the heartbeat of Bluebrook. The results were coming, and I knew when that light went dark, justice would finally begin to speak. Saturday morning I woke before sunrise. The rain had stopped, and only a thin mist like smoke drifted through the pines. On the table, my phone buzzed lightly. A message from Claire. Portland Lab just sent results. Subject A is not Subject B. I read that line over and over. 3 short words, but heavier than a court ruling. No more doubt. The person living with me is not the real Martha. Someone had put my wife's face on to take everything. I set the phone down, my palm cold. Morning light fell across the wooden table and shone on the old ruler hanging on the wall. The Failsafe Bridge, 1974. Ruler. I went to take it down. The wood was darkened by years, but the carved marks were still sharp. When I touched it, something in me clicked back into place. It was the first bridge I ever designed, and where I learned that real structures stand only when you plan for mistakes. But never forgive deceit. Noah came in holding an iPad. Urgent. Grandpa, the AirTag signal's moving. I turned. Where to? All 3 dots are heading the same direction, he said, eyes fixed on the screen. I moved closer. 3 signals. David, the fake Martha, and a new signal. Just now appearing from the hospital code where the real Martha is being treated. All 3 are converging on Town Hall, Noah whispered. I looked at the electronic map. 3 red dots meeting at the same point in downtown Bluebrook. It can't be a coincidence, I said. Claire called at that moment. Mr. Harrington, listen. The Bluebrook Council just sent a notice. On Monday morning, they will open a public hearing on the Bluebrook Village project. If I'm right, that's where David and the Harlan and Cost's team intend to sign all the transfer papers. And her? I asked. She will play the role of the final signer, Claire replied, cold and decisive. We have DNA results, which give us grounds to file an emergency order. I'll handle the legal side. But you must be ready for Monday morning. There will be no other chance. I looked out the window, the mist thinning to reveal distant ridges. The wind ran through the leaves, like the whispers of the past. Claire, I said slowly, if they want to turn Bluebrook into concrete, I will make that morning the concrete of truth. A pause on the line, then Claire, steady. Then we'll build the last bridge between justice and deceit. I closed the phone, opened the drawer, and placed the Failsafe Bridge 1974 ruler before me. Noah looked at me, half afraid, half admiring. What will you do? He asked. Draft the final plan, I said, my hand smoothing the ruler. This bridge won't cross a river. It will cross the dark. Outside, the church bells rang at noon. I knew when those bells rang again on Monday morning, every mask would have to fall. Claire had arranged to meet me at Town Hall at 8:30 with all the files, evidence, and the emergency asset freeze order. I looked at the wooden ruler in my hand, its carved line faded by years. Fail-safe bridge, 1974. I whispered to myself, this time, the last bridge I hold steady will be justice. Weak daylight hit the table, reflecting a thin blade of light. On my computer screen, a new email from the lab appeared. DNA report uploaded, awaiting court verification. In the lower right, the upload icon blinked red, a frantic heartbeat like Blue Brook's pulse before judgment. The official result was on the way, and I understood everything was in motion. The final round had begun. Monday morning, the sky over Blue Brook was pale gray, a fine misty rain falling like dust along the road leading to Town Hall. Even from the parking lot, I saw dozens of cars lined up, television cameras set, reporters jostling for position. The banner above the entrance read, Public Hearing, Blue Brook Village Development Proposal. Ordinary words, yet heavy as a verdict. I walked slowly, one hand gripping the wooden fail-safe bridge, 1974 ruler in my coat pocket, feeling each heartbeat blend with the wind whipping through the flags above the steps. Inside the hall, the air was taut as steel before it snaps. Locals filled both aisles, mostly people who had worked in the Blue Brook Forest Preserve, along with journalists, representatives from Harland and Coquand, and a few council members. David sat in the front row wearing a black suit, smiling with the confidence of a man who believed everything was under his control. Beside him sat the fake Martha, silver hair neatly curled, a jade brooch gleaming on her chest, the light glinting off it like a challenge. The moderator struck the gavel. We'll begin. David rose, his voice clear, a touch of arrogance in it. Members of the council, the Blue Brook Village Project, will bring significant revenue to the town, create jobs, and promote ecotourism. However, my father, Mr. William Bill Harrington, due to his age and poor health, is no longer capable of managing the trust, and has delegated authority to my mother, Mrs. Martha Harrington, to finalize the transfer of land from the Conservation Fund. A wave of murmurs swept the room. Some turned to look at me, the quiet old man in the back row, face calm, both hands resting on the wooden ruler. Then the fake Martha stepped up to the podium. Her voice was soft but firm. Mr. Harrington is no longer of sound mind. I represent him in signing the Blue Brook Village Development Agreement. All documents are prepared. I request the council's approval. The crowd stirred. Cameras flashed. I saw Claire standing at the right side of the room, her eyes sharp and steady. She didn't rush. She waited for the noise to fade. Just as the chair was about to nod for the signing, Claire stepped forward, her voice cutting through the room. Wait. Before any contract is signed, I, the legal representative of Mr. William Bill Harrington, request the council review evidence showing that the woman at this podium is not the real Mrs. Martha Harrington. The noise fell dead. David shot up. Who are you to interfere in my family's business? Claire didn't turn to him. She pulled a small silver USB drive and plugged it into the projector. The big screen behind the council lit up. This is a DNA analysis from the Portland laboratory, expedited and received this morning. Subject A, the person currently residing in Mr. Harrington's home, and Subject B, the verified sample of the real Mrs. Martha. Result, DNA does not match. A collective gasp filled the hall, the fake Martha's face drained of color, her hands gripping the podium edge. Claire continued. And this is security footage from Cedar Hill Motel, dated September 3rd. The screen shifted, showing the silver-haired woman seated with 5 men, exchanging thick envelopes and signing papers. The sound of hurried breathing spread through the room. David lunged forward. This is a misunderstanding. It could be an error, or Claire silenced him with a look sharp as a blade. Mr. David Harrington, your words alone prove you know exactly what's happening. I stood. The wooden chair creaked softly behind me. I walked down the aisle, feeling every eye fixed on me. My hand tightened around the old ruler. Yes, I'm old, I said, my voice steady yet carrying across the room. But I still remember every bolt and beam on the bridge I built in '74. I remember carving the words, "Fail-safe bridge," to remind myself that a bridge only collapses when people forget that the smallest deviation can kill. I turned toward David. You say I've forgotten, but it's you who has forgotten the line between trust and greed. The one who forgets most in this room is the one who lies. Silence fell, thick and absolute. Then a storm of flashes erupted, cameras firing like thunder. The fake Martha bowed her head. David stepped back, his face pale. Reporters pushed closer, chairs scraped, voices rose, but no one could form words. In that instant, light from the tall windows swept across the wooden floor, glinting off the ruler in my hand, illuminating the engraved words, "Fail-safe bridge, 1974, and I knew the bridge had held firm one final time. The next morning, the sky over Blue Brook was unusually clear, as if the night's rain had washed every trace of deceit from the air. I passed through the town center where a crowd still lingered outside town hall. On the large electronic board, the headlines scrolled repeatedly. Blue Brook Council suspends all Blue Brook Village project files. Harlan and Co. developers announce withdrawal. Below it, local newspapers pinned along the fence had already printed photos from the hearing, the shot of me standing in the middle of the hall, the wooden ruler in my hand catching the camera's flash. People called it the fail-safe moment. I only saw an old man defending what was right. Claire sent a brief message. Initial justice achieved. The county prosecutor's office opened a criminal investigation against David and Harlan and Co. I didn't reply right away. In my mind still echoed the sounds of yesterday, the wind through the chamber, the snapping cameras, and the thick silence after truth was revealed. That afternoon, a young reporter came to my house, microphone in hand. "Mr. Harrington, after everything, do you want to say anything to your wife and son?" I looked out toward the Blue Brook forest turning golden, sunlight spilling through the tall trunks as if nature itself was exhaling. I answered slowly, "I just hope they learn how to build again, not destroy. Building a home, a bridge, or a family all need a real foundation. Destroying, anyone can do that." She lowered her head, voice trembling a little as she thanked me. The camera turned off, leaving only the sound of the wind under the eaves. A few days later, news spread. David Harrington was under investigation for power of attorney, fraud, and forgery. And according to the Blue Brook Chronicle front page, woman impersonating Mrs. Martha Harrington identified. Local stage actress Anna Cole. She had once been a background actress in commercial plays around Portland, known for mimicking voices and gestures. 3 months earlier, David had hired her through TalentWorks agency under a short-term $38,000 contract with strict confidentiality. Records showed David gave Anna a recognition training kit, over 200 photos, family videos, Christmas recordings, even a handwritten behavioral memo, listing every small habit of his mother. Always adjusts collar before sitting, drinks tea with left hand, hates strong perfume, speaks slowly when emotional. Anna was taken to a private aesthetic clinic in Salem to subtly alter her chin, dye her hair silver, and fill her cheeks to resemble Martha's recent appearance. When asked, a makeup expert said, "At a glance, or if you didn't live with her, it would be almost impossible to tell." She even practiced shallow breathing after each line, like someone with a heart condition. It was all staged like a perfect play, except this time the audience was an old husband and the entire town of Blue Brook. When the report aired on television, I just stared at the mirror. In the reflection, I saw myself on the night I first sensed something wrong, when Martha drank Earl Grey without a single wince. Now every piece fits. I received the news not with triumph, but with emptiness. Justice had come, but no one had won this game. Only wreckage remained to be cleared, a tarnished name, a lost son, and an old man learning again how to believe in what's good. The bridge 1974 ruler's wood had darkened with age, but its carved lines still glowed under the warm lamp. I held it, turning it so the light caught the grain. In that moment, I saw my reflection tremble, not from fatigue, but because what I once believed in had somehow survived. Outside, the Blue Brook forest was quiet, except for the drip of water from the gutter onto the grass. I looked down at the ruler, seeing last night's camera flashes still lingering in its veins of wood, a light both cold and warm, like justice itself. Not dazzling, not loud, just bright enough to expose the truth. I traced the faded engraving with my fingertip and whispered, almost as a confession, "Sometimes light doesn't need to blind, it just needs to be strong enough to make the guilty look away." And in that moment, I realized my hands were no longer trembling. When everything had finally quieted, I was calm enough to hear the real story, the story of how Martha had disappeared. 2 days after the hearing, Claire called me, her voice steady but trembling slightly. "Bill, I just got a call from St. Ann's Hospice in Salem. There's a female patient named Martha H., admitted since March, with a minor car accident, concussion, and temporary memory loss. No one ever came for her. You should come. Immediately." I sat motionless for minutes, the fail-safe ruler trembling in my hand. All those months I had lived with confusion over the imposter. The real woman had been lying alone in a white hospital room, less than an hour's drive from home. The next afternoon I went to St. Anne's. The hallway was long, sunlight slanting through the glass. When the doctor opened the door, I saw her sitting by the window, silver gold hair falling softly, thin hands resting on a blanket. Before I could speak, she looked up, her eyes uncertain, then glimmering. "Bill, is the bridge still standing?" I nodded, my chest tightening. "Still standing, just like you." The doctor explained that on the day of the accident, she had been driving to Portland to buy medicine for me when her car skidded on wet pavement. Her wallet was lost, and she had no ID. When she woke, she couldn't recall her address, and she kept repeating one word, Blue Brook. They thought it was just the name of an old town she'd lived in, so no one contacted me. David learned about it through a hospital acquaintance and used the chance to forge a death certificate to begin his acting on behalf of mother scheme. I sat with her all afternoon, telling her every small thing about the house, the cracked teapot, the lavender by the porch, the Lake Crescent painting we once made together. Then I said, half joking, half trembling, "I knew the moment they tried to fake you, because the real Martha would never drink Earl Grey without sugar and not flinch." She laughed, soft and clear, the same sound that could melt an entire winter. "You still keep that teapot on the shelf?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "and the rocking chair you used every afternoon." She held my hand, her gaze gentle. "I'm sorry for leaving you alone." I shook my head. "You didn't go missing. The road home was just hidden for a while." 3 months later, the official papers declared Blue Brook Preserve designated as protected heritage land. Noah and I founded the Harrington Environmental Trust, a small foundation supporting education and conservation. The old house became its office, with a brass plaque engraved, "Built with integrity, preserved by truth." One morning, Claire visited, handed me a folder, and said softly, "Your name has been given to the fail-safe bridge. They're calling it the Bridge of Trust." I was speechless. Amid all that had collapsed, one thing still stood, love and truth. That afternoon, I returned to St. Anne's. Martha sat in the lavender garden, sunlight spilling over her shoulders. I placed before her a photo of the newly restored fail-safe bridge and said, "I kept my promise, Martha. The forest is protected, the bridge still stands, and my name, really, belongs to you." She looked at me, smiling like sunlight through pines. "Because we built it with love, Bill. Nothing built with love ever falls." I sat beside her until dusk, holding her hand as if holding back a piece of my heart that had just been returned. The wind from Blue Brook Forest carried the scent of pine and damp earth. In that golden light, I finally understood that the foundation of truth isn't stone or steel, but love and trust, the things we must rebuild with our hearts once they are lost. Exactly 1 year after I walked into the boardroom of Harland & Co., Blue Brook had changed to its core, not because of a passing scandal, but because people had started rebuilding from the ground up, digging for truth, mending fractures, and planting saplings where there had once been holes. On the morning Aurora Learning Lodge opened, the sky was as clear as poured glass. Dew still clung to the leaves, and the scent of wet pine lingered on everyone's clothes. At the gate, the brass plaque gleamed. Aurora Learning Lodge, Harrington Environmental Trust. Built with truth, given with grace. No further explanation was needed. It was a promise kept. The children ran in holding hands, drawing bridges with their pencils, laughing brightly. Noah stood among them, showing how a joint bears weight. I stood behind, listening, my heart light as a falling leaf. The rustle of the forest blended with the hum of children's voices into a small symphony, the sound of a place healing. But justice didn't end with a protected forest or a plaque. What had happened in court couldn't be forgotten. David, my son, who had stood beside the impostor and signed the forged documents, had to face the law. After a lengthy investigation supported by DNA evidence, reports, and recordings too clear to deny, the prosecutor charged him with power of attorney fraud, conspiracy to defraud, elder abuse, and document forgery. The Marion County Court in Oregon sentenced David Harrington to 7 years in prison, 3 years of supervised release, and restitution of $280,000 to the Harrington Environmental Trust for damages and legal costs. He was also banned from working in finance or real estate for 10 years and ordered to complete a state rehabilitation program on ethical business conduct. The trial wasn't theatrical, it was solemn, where justice did its work, listening, comparing, and deciding on evidence. When the verdict was read, I saw no anger in David's face, only the emptiness of someone who had just understood the price of deceit. I sat among the spectators, hand gripping the old wooden ruler, and thought, a bridge may collapse, but a human heart can still be rebuilt. I couldn't call it joy. The image of my son under the courtroom lights, his face small among the rows, eyes vacant as he realized he had lost more than money. That isn't something that makes a father proud. Legal punishment was necessary to protect the vulnerable and preserve the legacy, but to me it was a quiet grief. I had raised him, taught him how to tighten a bolt, how to check a bridge, drawing. Seeing him now pay the price broke my heart a little. Justice had come, but it arrived like a solemn note, without celebration, without triumph. The townsfolk spoke of the case. The papers printed it. The internet carried cruel questions. David bore public shame and professional ruin, his CPA license revoked, his advisory credentials canceled, his name placed on the state's disbarred individuals list. Yet much of the community shared my feeling. They didn't want to relish a son's downfall. They wanted to ensure no one else would be hurt the same way. So the town council, after halting the development project, approved a recovery plan expanding environmental education programs, with stricter transparency and heritage management. The lodge opening became a day to reflect and move forward. Noah led the children across a small wooden bridge, built by local craftsmen to my design. Martha sat on the porch, finishing the scarf she'd been knitting for months, her eyes calm like a small boat after the storm. She squeezed my hand, sharing a quiet strength. Watching the children, I remembered when David was their age, hands greasy, eyes bright, as he looked at his first bridge drawing. Life had sent us on different paths. Now those of us left chose to mend nets and shelter saplings. When the school band began to sing, I stepped up to the small podium. I didn't speak about verdicts or restitution as if they were trophies. I spoke of bridges, how we build them not just to cross, but to keep promises to the next generation. I said justice doesn't show off. It's the quiet sound of a breath through the forest, the song of children, the clink of shared tea, the voices of those rebuilding from ruin. As the sun set, casting gold over the brass plaque, Martha rose, placed her hand on the engraving, her eyes glowing with something like forgiveness. I joined her, my arm around her shoulders, and together we listened to the forest, to the sound of justice, not fierce, not vengeful, but steady, allowing everything to heal. David will live with the weight of his choices. We, the ones who survived the storm, choose to tell this story to the children, not as a harsh lesson, but to show that truth and love can build bridges stronger than concrete. And when the children sing, when new shoots rise from the ground once threatened with erasure, I know I am hearing the true sound of justice, gentle, enduring, and full of hope. And so the Blue Brook journey closes. A forest preserved, a bridge bearing an old engineer's name, and a family, once broken, learning again to see each other honestly. I am no longer the one searching for justice, because justice at last found its way. It came not with thunder or applause, but softly, like wind through pine needles, like a child's laughter by the stream. I once thought justice was a verdict, the end of a battle, but now I know true justice is when you can forgive without forgetting, when you rebuild the fallen bridge not for revenge, but so others can cross safely. If you're listening to this story and have ever been betrayed or lost faith, remember this: truth never dies. It just waits for you to be calm enough to see it. Leave A. If you believe justice doesn't need to shout, it just needs to stand firm. Write your city below so I'll know where you're listening from, because wherever you are, those who believe in truth live under the same roof. And if you want to hear more real stories, where justice walks in silence and light, subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. I'm Bill Harrington, and this is my story. The story of a forest, a bridge, and the sound of justice. Because sometimes justice doesn't arrive with thunder. It arrives in the quiet rustle of leaves in the wind,